All financial support for this podcast comes from my patrons on patreon.com. If you'd like to join in with the patrons, please check out patreon.com/DarwinGross. That's DarwinGrosse. Now enjoy the podcast. Okay, today I get a chance to speak to somebody that's new to me, but depending on where you're coming from, he may not be new to you at all. His name's Rob Ray, and he has this really interesting history where he was involved in an art space in the Chicago area during a very opportune time, a time where he got a chance to see a lot of burgeoning art and performance work happening. And that was kind of a lead-in to an awful lot of interesting things in his life. He's currently in the process of doing some archival work on it, and I am very anxious to have you meet him. So with no more ado, let's talk to Rob Ray. Hey, Rob, how's it going?
Greetings, Darwin. How's it going?
It's going great. I want to thank you so much for taking the time to have this chat. It's a Saturday afternoon for those who aren't following me live, so I really appreciate you taking time out of your Saturday to have this chat.
Yeah, happy to. My puppy just fell asleep. So great timing.
It's perfect timing indeed. So I would like to start by having you talk a little bit about Deadtech. What was Deadtech, and when did it run, and what kind of stuff were you doing there?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, thanks for asking. Deadtech was, I think, different things to different people. It was, in its most basic form, it was a kind of raw warehouse space in the northeast side of Chicago, Illinois. And it existed from about 1999 to 2008, so about 9 years. And it was a place, really, I think, to incubate my curiosities. And a lot of those sort of took the form of interactive art and electronic media and experimental electronic music and noise and performance and electronics. So we sort of, and I say we because it sort of quickly became a sort of loose affiliation of people, or a sort of posse of people in the most organic way possible, who did things there. So we had things like the Chicago meetings for PD, Pure Data. We had like kind of more proper, quote unquote, installation art pieces. We had also, though, like kind of open soldering iron events. So this was kind of in the pre kind of hackerspace, makerspace era. So it's kind of a proto hackerspace in some ways, but with an art and music and sound focus.
Sure. Well, it's interesting. I kind of mentioned around my workplace at Cycling 74 that I was going to be talking to you, and that you had been involved in Deadtech, and a number of people had heard of it. There was one person who specifically said he used to go, another person who thought that he had performed there. Mm-hmm. But when I asked them kind of like, what did you see it, or what did you know of it as, it seemed like a complete hodgepodge. Some people thought of it as a performance space. Some of them thought of it as a hack space or a workshop kind of space.
Yep.
And even those who thought of it as a performance space, there were some people who thought of it as like performance art, and other people that were like, well, it was kind of like mini raves. It sounded like you just kind of took on all comers.
I mean, I think the thing that's fun about being in a kind of microcosm, right, and whatever that means to you, of arts or creative people or nerds of a specific type, is there's actually a lot of overlapping, right? Like we would have someone who was a performer, but they also did work with maybe visual artists to integrate sound components into an installation or something, right? And so that sort of mixed media, I think in some ways we get sort of trained to bifurcate practices, right? And I think for me, what we realized quickly is actually one of the valuable things that Deadtech could contribute to the arts was being willing to bend that thinking a little bit and sort of have people who did a performance do a workshop then the next morning, or collaborate with a visual artist, maybe even at another art space in Chicago at the same time. So in that way to kind of spread out, like let people kind of despecialize their interests or kind of their identities.
Yeah, well, and actually in that time frame was a kind of a peculiar time in both art and technology time and music, where what you saw was a lot of mixing and matching, but also you started to see kind of the rise of glitch kind of like
Definitely.
glitch culture, definitely the rise of the DIY culture kind of thing.
Yep.
And that had to be really, having a space like that had to be really empowering for those communities.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think it was definitely a time where, I mean, I think this might be a generational kind of comment, but I think at that time you could feel underneath your feet the shift from thinking things like computer culture and internet culture were for you, and seeing that kind of shift out from underneath you, where it became something that kind of hypercapitalism was digging into in a very really deliberate way.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that sort of gave rise to people feeling like they needed to reconnect or connect differently with technology, or sort of interrogate technology through glitch practices or something like that, right? And so, yeah, and definitely Deadtech we were all very interested in that concept.
Sure. One of the things that actually kind of made me jump out of my seat with your first email to me was the link to a Vimeo collection where you're starting to digitize some of the recordings that you made at the time. And oh my God, there's some amazing stuff there. And,
Thank you.
And also, some of these things are 20 years old. So you're seeing I'm seeing people that I saw 2 weeks ago, but I'm seeing them 20 years ago. And it's really quite amazing to see them get older, but also see where they were coming from artistically or musically. It's a phenomenal collection.
Definitely. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. I mean, all of these tapes, I just started going through the archive after literally lugging boxes and boxes of mini DV tapes around in my life for years. And which was actually kind of one of the things that prompted me to do it was really, ironically, the death of the technology that like my FireWire port disappeared on my computer. My mini DV player was glitchy. And I was like, if I don't get this digitized soon, it's just, something's going to happen in my life. There'll be a fire or something and it's going to go away. So I felt like I had to act on it. It has been really great to reconnect in some ways with some of the performers, because I do let the performers know if I can find them on the internet, and some of the people, of course, I still am close to. But it's interesting because I think, as we move through our lives, we lose touch with people. And so it's funny in some ways to have a kind of baked idea of who the person is and then be able to reconnect with them 20 years later through a performance they did. So it's really nice.
Sure, no doubt. That's really interesting. I can imagine, though, that there have to be a fair number of people you can't find anymore, either because they aren't using the name that they did at the time, or they just aren't around anymore. Yeah.
There's and people's like life trajectory, just changes, right? Like some people maybe move or just become immersed in some other part of their life, and so it's hard to get a hold of them. It's also been really interesting because also some people's art practices have really changed throughout their life.
Right.
And so I try to be sensitive to that in some ways. I mean, some people we worked with have become, they make their living through their artwork. And that's the arts is a kind of vicious place sometimes, right? Where people feel like the work they maybe did in the past isn't who they are anymore. Right. And so I've been trying to be attentive to that and at least talk about to the performers, if it feels like, especially some people's lives are particularly palpable that like, oh, they just live a different life now. And so I want to be respectful of that in some ways. But it's been a great way to just reconnect with lots of people.
In doing the digitization work, have you had anybody who said, no, don't do it?
Not yet. I there's a few I have coming that I think that could happen.
Oh, really?
And I think what I'm going to do is actually mail them the tape. And again, it's not because like they did something really wrong or weird, but it's just because like I think it is important for people to, I mean, part of what Deadtech was about was letting you take a chance on something that another place wouldn't let you take a chance on, right? So say you wanted to do a one-off performance where you just like baked a cake or something. Right. I don't know, sure. And like now, like that's just not your work anymore. I mean, it's kind of a weird thing to say, but people's livelihoods and like their ability to get healthcare and like feed themselves and their family is kind of dependent on their back catalog and their portfolio. And so I take that seriously. Right. And I want to be attentive to that. And I never would want to collaborate with someone to only 20 years later be like, I have this hot tape. Guess what? Like it just feels gross. So like I definitely want to be attentive to that.
Well, I was actually kind of hoping for like some story where like, there was a person who used to roll around in chocolate while playing a saxophone, but now they're a Jehovah's Witness, so they can,
right. And there certainly may still be that tape.
All right, well, I'll be watching Vimeo for that release.
Yep. Yeah. I do have one thing that actually is really great that happened is Seth Cluett, who I think is a person who's been on your podcast before.
Yes.
I will admit this openly. I lost Seth's tape literally the next day. Like Seth did a great installation and he did a performance as well. And I literally promptly lost the tape. Like as soon as I recorded it, and I found it like a month ago in a stack of unlabeled tapes. And I literally cried. And because Seth had asked me for it on occasion, very nicely, a few times throughout his life, it was just like, hey, by the way, did you ever find that tape? And I was like, no. And I felt so bad about it because I knew it existed somewhere. Right. And so I found it and he was very excited to see it. So it worked out great.
That's amazing. So when you started this place in 1999, what were you doing that put you in a position to open up an art space that got to be, that you got a 9-year run out of? I mean, that's pretty incredible. How did you get started?
So I was like a punk rock kid and like a computer kid and a visual art kid in a way that maybe many kids are even still today. And I kind of first learned about noise music, and it was really interesting to me, especially Japanese noise, which is a genre that was particularly kind of popular in the 90s, and it still is, I'm sure, but was really popular to me and really interesting to me. And there was always like a kind of, and like there was like Tetsuo, the movie had come out, and that was like this really amazing black and white film, has a lot of like robots in it, and there was like Survival Research Labs was this kind of, and still is, this legendary like robotics performance troupe. And so for me, and I still think of art this way, like it's all kind of the same thing, right? Like, yes, this group may not make music, but like what they're making could be music, if you think of it that way, because it's, robots slapping themselves on the ground or whatever. And so for me, I was like, wow, this stuff is really cool. And I used to take apart kind of those old school large wooden television sets in high school.
Oh, yeah.
And make like collages inside of them and stuff. And I made like my first kind of fuzz pedal for my bass in high school. And that was like the first kind of really project that I felt was my own, which is a kind of electronics meets punk rock kind of project, And so I moved to Chicago kind of on a whim. I was in Florida at the time and a little bit bored and a little bit kind of misguided. And so I moved to Chicago just because the music scene was good and a friend of mine lived there. And I stumbled into living in a warehouse space just because it was an opportunistic agreement between a coworker and myself. And I quickly realized like, oh, I have this massive space. Like I could build a skate ramp or something in here, but like maybe I could do other things. I don't know. And I didn't know I wasn't a part of often arts communities can be connected to like academia, right, or to a college or something.
Sure.
And I had moved to Chicago just on my own, like I didn't know anybody. And so I thought like, well, if I start doing shows, maybe people will show up. And they did, fortunately. And so I quickly sort of found community through that.
That's amazing. So your move to Chicago was nothing more than you thought it had an interesting music scene and you decided to give it a fling?
It seemed interesting. Like I really liked Big Black. And so I moved to Chicago, right? Which is like totally like logic that maybe should be a bigger part of my life now than it is. But like just doing something on a whim because it compels you can really change your life, I guess.
Yeah, I guess it can. Well, that's something. And so you kind of describe yourself as a computer and punk kid, also drawn to the Japanese noise scene.
Yeah.
One of the interesting things to me from watching the videos from Deadtech is that there's a certain amount of noise-oriented stuff.
Yes.
But again, it was not locked to any kind of genre, or especially when I think of again, the time was sort of like breaking down those barriers, but still, there was sort of like this sense of like the difference between, people with more of a punk or a aggro background versus the kind of people coming from a more hippie laid back background. And from what I can tell, your space sort of like occupied the intersection of practically anybody that wanted to consider themselves artful.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think it's because this is a fault maybe, but I'm definitely like a multi-hyphenate kind of person. Like I would love to, like I will say 1 week in at Deadtech, we had like a 24-hour drone performance, and then we had like a 400 person like micro house and like techno performance. Mm-hmm. And so like things just swung back and forth that way, and to me, like that's what was maybe the most interesting part about it was, and what's funny, right, is I think is what you realize is a lot of those people go to both shows,
right,
like
sure.
They don't just go to one or the other. And so I think we sort of get kind of codified in our thinking about who likes our music or what interests people. And so I've always tried to crack that open a little bit.
Right. Now, I mean, first of all, were you working during this time, or was Deadtech able to support you?
No, not at all. It was definitely it's definitely the worst investment financially you could make in your life.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean,
all right. So investors beware. This is not the podcast for you.
No. Running an art space is a money sink, or can be for sure. Fortunately I lived there. So that was an important part of it, right? Is your kind of rent is doing this kind of dual duty thing. It also means though that like when you wake up after the party the next day that you're surrounded by like empty beer bottles and cigarette butts and stuff.
Right.
But which is, just part of it. I was working ironically, I was the first. I first got my kind of first real computer job at this kind of meat processing facility in Chicago, which was an interesting place to work.
That's like as Chicago of a job as you can get,
isn't it? Yeah. Covered in like cattle entrails, like,
but still programming. So
still programming. Yeah. Building like an inventory system for them. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Unreal.
Yeah, it was fun. And so that certainly like I had a means of financial support, and honestly, like, computer jobs pay pretty well, right? And so I was pretty lucky in being able to financially invest in a thing that was interesting to me creatively, and a lot of artists just aren't able to. So yeah, I had a tech support job, and the name Deadtech kind of came from that job because I was in tech support, and we had this kind of closet where we kept throwing dead computers, and we were forced to clean it out by our boss one day because he just got sick of it being full of stuff.
Right.
And a coworker of mine, Kim Russell, who's also a really creative, interesting person still today, she opened up the door, and we were forced with like dealing with this whole thing. And she's just like, "Oh, this is a bunch of dead tech." And I was like, and like the light bulb came on for me. Like, oh, that's really a cool phrase. And I had a noise compilation that was put out by Charnel House called Deadtech 3. And so that it kind of immediately overlapped for me that like this could be an interesting word. So I kind of asked for permission and got it.
That's really cool. That's a fun story. So the thing is that a lot of times, I don't know, I never actually know how these gallery spaces maintain themselves. Quite frankly, sometimes I worry that what you're seeing is somebody spending their divorce settlement or something, and that's about it. But it sounds to me like you, first of all, were running a lot of stuff through there. But I mean, did you have some way to make it so it at least kind of paid its way, or did you just not sweat it?
A little bit of both. I mean,
and quite frankly, I ask because something that you said, and other guests of the podcast have said this as well, that doing something like this is a really fantastic way to get to know the artists in a place when you move there, but kind of understanding how it might be at least not a complete Category 5 tornado of your money, would probably be a good thing, or at least helping to understand how it can be as self-sufficient as possible.
Totally, yeah. I mean, I think something that we should be thinking about even today is that people are our best resource, right? Like in life, and so one of the things I did that kind of amazingly worked out is I bought a pair of Mackie SRM 450s, which was a pretty nice at the time, and still is, like a kind of portable but robust sound system that kind of served lots of purposes. Like it could support someone playing like a real kind of intense listening experience, kind of micro sound, kind of performance, or it could support Green Velvet wanting to play a show on his night off or something in Chicago. And so that was a really good investment. But at the same time, like I didn't even, because I was like a laptop musician, I didn't even own microphones, So I had to be like, hey, send out an email like, does anyone have a mic? There's actually someone here who uses their voice. And so emails, and just knowing who your friends are and the different types of things that they do can really help pull things together,
Now, the time period that this spans is also interesting because at the beginning of this time, 1999, that was a time when we were very fascinated by people having a laptop on stage.
Yes.
And sort of laptop performance was the thing.
Yep.
By the time you get to the end of this run, 2008, what you're seeing is a lot of people using combinations of hardware. Some of the earlier kind of modular systems would have been showing up. You would have seen a lot of small boxes like Electron boxes, stuff like that. You would have actually seen a difference in the technology that people were using to perform shows. Is that true?
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. I mean, I remember Dopefer, who is like a Euro, the kind of, I think of like the godfathers of the Euro rack.
The person who started it, right? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I know of Dopefer because they made a like little knob set, MIDI controlled knob set that people were using for like Ableton Live and Max MSP.
Right.
It was the A100, I think. And I bought it. And it was like the most expensive thing I owned for a while. And it's great. But it was interesting because people started to think about hardware differently. I think like many things, like the pendulum of culture, like things swing back and forth. And so there was a lot of, people would get kind of slammed in some ways if they started to play with only a laptop, because there was always this kind of suspicion already of electronic music. And then, and even though ironically, right, like a lot of those people were playing on their work laptop, because it was the best system they could get. And so it's not like they were particularly fancy. It was just the tool they had. But yeah, I mean, now certainly the just vast array of small, very creative boxes that people are able to make with, microcontrollers and components and places like SparkFun and Adafruit and places like that. Like it's really just exploded. And even, I never really thought I'd see the day where Korg, who was kind of known for, just this,
mainline,
has really just dove in and made it a part of their identity, which is pretty cool. Like it's maybe easy to dismiss that stuff or be suspicious of it, but at the same time, like some of those boxes are really neat. So
yeah, they are. Well, and the other thing that's kind of interesting is it seems like in addition to moving towards smaller stuff, that they've actually moved towards fun stuff.
Yes,
and I think that that's one of the things that maybe, if nothing else, the whole electronic movement sort of pushed the instrument world into, is saying, not everything has to be making movie theme songs, right? Sometimes we can just have fun too.
Yep.
And I think the electronic music scene really kind of drove instrument creators in that direction.
Yeah, definitely.
Now, you said that you were that in addition to doing performances and stuff, you also did kind of workshops and meetup type things. Yeah. You said specifically the PD, like there was a PD user group that was based out of there?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Rob Drinkwater in Chicago runs the Max users group. And so we didn't want to forever and is a super great friend and stuff. So we kind of knew like he's really got that covered. And there was other just stuff happening. And he actually, I think, encouraged us to, he was like, PD doesn't have a night. And so we thought like, so Justin Rounds, who was a really close collaborator of mine for many years, was like, hey, let's start doing PD. And then there's a community of people who run events called the Dorkbot events.
Yes.
And I think I just stumbled onto that email news group or something at the time and was just like, those are my people. And there wasn't one in Chicago. And so we started a monthly Dorkbot event, which was, again, like, I think the tagline for Dorkbot is people doing strange things with electricity. And that immediately had my name written all over it. So.
Yeah, I'll bet. But now it's kind of interesting because there again, you talk about like one of the things happening kind of throughout that time frame was the hyper commercialization of the internet. And to me, Dorkbot was like one of the last hurrahs of people just saying, hey, let's be as crusty as we can while still having fun with electronics. And then after that, it's like Make Magazine and glossy covered books and all this kind of stuff ended up ruling the day. And so it really kind of changed it even changed the perspective of what DIY looked like, I thought.
Definitely. Yeah. Yeah, it became in a way almost like when I look at old like Popular Mechanics magazine PDFs, from the 50s or something, it has that kind of vibe where there was a kind of just a group of people who are trying to, and this is the good work, trying to get people who maybe don't have a life of creative experiences to sort of find their own creative voice, and I totally support that 100%. But it does get weird because it goes from thinking like, well, maybe I should make contact mics and sell them on Etsy. And then it becomes like, maybe I should make somebody wants 1,000. And then it turns into like, I'm the contact mic overlord.
Right. I'm going to run Facebook ads about my contact mics to everyone who's ever used the word microphone in anything. Right.
Yeah. And I say that, I've always sort of out of fear had a full-time job and stuff. And so I don't want to be dismissive of someone who's actually been able to make their living selling contact mics.
Oh, right. Sure.
On Etsy. Shout out to Crank Sturgeon. But
covering all your bases there, right?
Yeah. And it's because I'm jealous. But at the same time, like it is weird, I guess is more than off-putting. It's more weird to see how things you care about get co-opted, right? By kind of larger systems larger than yourself. And so it's something to stay in tune with for sure.
Right. That makes sense. So this is going to be a hard question, but I'll frame it in a way that hopefully will give you an entree for an answer. Okay. So over that 9 years, you would have, especially since you're living there, so you couldn't even really duck out of performances, right?
Sure.
You were gonna watch them whether you liked it or not.
Yep.
What of those things really stand out to you? Ooh. What are like the most memorable moments?
Wow. Okay, I have a few. Some of them are very personal. One of them is there was a 5-year Deadtech anniversary party that I kind of didn't know about, and it was like kind of everybody who I collaborated with and a bunch of people who had come from out of town to celebrate that 5 years had made it for 5 years. That Deadtech had made it.
Right.
And that show, like, it's those types of shows where it's not like a fancy headliner. It's not a show that made you any money. It's like where your friends came and had a good time. Like that is like a huge, like that's what you remember, So I still like really think about that a lot. Though that said, there are some shows that are just outright amazing. The Seamen came in their kind of robotics performance group, Cal Spolytics kind of brainchild. They're a very large scale, very fiery robot performance. Somehow it had come across to me that they were looking for venues because they wanted to go on tour. And so I contacted them and said, hey, I have this space in Chicago. And I think they were a little bit nervous anytime anyone contacted them because they knew they were more than most people could handle,
Right.
And so he kind of said like, well, we have this rider, we had all these things we want. We have a very fiery show. It's very risky. And I just wrote back and said, I tell you what, you can keep all the door, just come. And so he said, okay. And he showed up and with his crew of folks and the Seamen had their shows. And someone asked like, oh, why did you play there? Or something like that. And he replied, he's the only person who let us, which I thought was a really great way to think about it. Right. It's like sometimes you think like, oh, I'm putting on this show and I'm so lucky to do it. And then you realize that the performer feels the same way.
Yeah, right.
That they actually have someone who is excited as they are about the show. So It was good. KK Null also played. That was the first show we had. KK Null is a personal hero of mine and like a kind of god of a musician in my book. And he played our first show, which really, I think, helped in some ways put me on people's radar to be like, what is this new space, And still today, like anything he puts out, I'm going to listen to. So to even know that I played the tiniest of roles in his creative life feels really important and great.
Oh, that's cool. Was there any like real disasters? Again, how big was the place?
It's about the performance and exhibition space was about 1,800 square feet, something like that.
All right.
And then the front room, which was divided into two sections. One was like the kind of electronics. It was the quote unquote clean room, but it was like the dustiest, grossest room of the whole place. But it was where like the spare robotic arm we found in the trash lived. And the drill press, but also the soldering station. Right?
Well, I got to just tell you that really what you've already said, I can imagine like dumpster diving behind your place would have been a pretty fun activity.
Yeah, it was good. Yeah, and Chicago in general, like, is pretty good dumpster diving, so it kept us entertained for sure. So yeah, it was a pretty big space.
I ask because some of these performances that you talk about and some of the work, it seemed like there's some potential danger there, and B, it sounds like in some cases you drew a fair number of people. Yeah,
and that's a super great point, and it's something that should definitely be underscored by anyone considering or who still does operate a kind of underground space. Is like, it's something that many of your listeners will be thoughtful or know about, is the ghost ship fire. You know, I mean, I will say, like, still today, it super freaks me out to think about, because the first thing that comes to mind is like, that could have been me and my friends,
right?
And still could be, because many of us still are active in those communities. Brian Chippendale who's a person I don't know, but who's the drummer. He's the drummer for Lightning Bolt. Wrote an amazing piece about the kind of duality of living in a dangerous place and doing dangerous things and the importance of it, and at the same time the real attentiveness you need to have to people's safety. And that was really important to me. It just came out. He released it a little bit ago, and I actually contacted him on a whim over social media, which is maybe one of the nicest things about social media, is you have a way to reach out to people who you don't know.
Right.
And his writing was really important to me, and definitely something I think about, because we have had some near disasters at Deadtech. Some of them were more imagined than real. Like, we had a person, for some reason, this other weird party that had gotten booked downstairs from us, and someone had let off a fire extinguisher, and a kind of panic ensued because people thought the building was on fire. And so the fire department came and the police came. And when I said the fire department came, it was like 6 trucks, because it was a warehouse fire that was called in. And so it was, half of the Chicago first responders were out at my door, and I don't know how I pulled this off, but what I just decided I would do is I just stood up to them and said, like, look, this is my fault. Do whatever you have to do. Like, this was a mistake. I didn't mean for this to happen. I'm sorry, you're wasting your time.
Right.
And they were totally nice. They were like, okay, great. Like, we'll just take a walk through the building, make sure everything's actually cool. There's not really a fire, and we'll be on our way. And I was like, oh my God, thank you. So it could have turned into a real, you can always imagine, right, a disaster where you get shut down, you get incarcerated, I don't know what, but it worked out.
Well, I mean, that had to be a real concern, though, because especially during some of that time period, I mean, it was much more so the case in the UK, but I remember I was living in Milwaukee during that time, and there was an awful lot of police shutdowns of anything that was underground performance. You had to be concerned about that often.
Yeah, the anti-rave ordinances, right, are still really a big deal. One of the things that was unusually nice about Deadtech, which was strange, is we were upstairs and in the middle of the warehouse. So there had to be some really serious bass in order for it to be audible from the front,
from the street, right?
Which was really great. And there was a kind of a long stairway to the top. And so if there was a line of people to get in, fortunately, Chicago is often extremely cold, so people don't like to stand outside.
Right.
So they would stand in the stairway, which was annoying for people trying to get up and down. But it was nice because we were pretty invisible for the most part from the outside world, which our neighbors appreciated and also kind of kept us undercover.
Sure. So what led to the wind down in 2008? What
Burnout.
Oh, yeah.
Burnout was the biggest one. I also had not ever been to grad school, even though I feel like I spent 9 years in grad school just doing shows. And I think I just wanted a life change a little bit. Like, I will admit that there was moments when you take on any project for that long where it kind of ebbs and flows, right? And at the time, it felt harder and harder to stay motivated and stay excited, even though I had tons of support and really great friends who would in a second help out with a show or something like that. And so I did decide to go to grad school. I went to Rensselaer, which is a really great place for me because of that combination of sort of serious thinking about electronic music and composition, and also a real sort of like contestational robotics kind of protest media and that sort of thing as well. So it was really a rich place for me. But I just burned out and called it a day.
Interesting. And so did that also correspond with you leaving Chicago as well?
It did. Yeah, it did. I live in Los Angeles now. It's been great for me. It's not a place I ever thought I would live, but I mean, that's the great thing about life is you do things you think you never will.
Right.
And it's been really fruitful for me. I mean, it's quote unquote the big city, like New York, and so it feels daunting at times to find your people and stuff. But it's been really great.
It's interesting. You must have made some incredible human connections though in Chicago, and that had to be a really hard thing to walk away from.
Yes, that is a very, very smart comment. Like, I think the thing that you only realize after the fact is how important your community is, to yourselves and to one another. I really realized, like, literally like the next month, how much creative stimulus my friends were to me,
right.
and how much they really shaped my creative identity and just my identity at all, and my sense of self and sense of fairness and all sorts of other things, and when you move into a new town and you're like, well, I know the person at the coffee shop because I go there every day,
right.
And you got to really start from zero. And especially when you run a space for a long time, people kind of ask what you do. And you're like, well, I ran this space that doesn't exist anymore. And they go like, huh. And that's all you get.
Sure.
And so they kind of don't know what to do with that. Where if you say like, right. Oh, I'm a touring DJ or something, they're like, okay, cool. They've got you in a
they know how to place that. Well, what do you have for an artistic practice now?
Yeah, it's very distributed. It's a very kind of internet enabled also at the same time. I have let's see, so many little projects happening, and I mean, this is kind of one of the reasons why I left the town I lived in the place where I kind of had a kind of ongoing role in that creative community, was to create a new one for myself here. And so I have a moniker named Shimmering Trashpile, which is a kind of noise / electro / techno identity. And it's a lot of the work I've been making since leaving Deadtech is trying to be like outside and in the world more. So because I spent so much time like sweeping on a Saturday.
Yeah, in a room, right?
In a room, with no lights. And so part of what Shimmering Trashpile is trying to do is to think about like street theater or performance or street art or like interventions in public space, and bring a kind of performance that is fun and interesting and weird to me to those communities, right? So thinking about street art and like how does it change our walk to work, or thinking about street performers or graffiti or that or even like sound walks or something, right? Like how do we engage public space in an interesting way? And so I've been working through some ideas there, and I'm going to try to go on a tour next year. We'll see how it goes. But part of the thing I want to do with that tour is to play, a small venue with a kind of audience who's expecting something to happen, but then also play a show in that town that's more impromptu, like under a bridge or in a dirt lot or something. So we'll see how that goes.
I'm always curious with people who have experienced a lot of work, and you in your time with Deadtech would have done this. What came out of that was most influential to you as an artist? How did that change the way that you thought about doing work?
This is maybe a strange answer to that, but I think I've always had in my head, like, before running a space, I think I only understood performers as their performative selves. Like I never really thought that like David Yao from the Jesus Lizard just wakes up in the morning and has a cup of coffee, or whatever, like, or that, Jello Biafra takes a shower. Like, right. I don't know, just like the lifiness of people. And for me, and I'll say like, Machine Project here in Los Angeles, which was a really amazing space that I had a lot of affinity with here in Los Angeles. And their kind of perspective was about like the creative how to inject creativity into everyday life. And so for me, I think Deadtech really made that real for me, which was, being inspired by lots of people who maybe didn't have goals of doing a world tour, but who were just amazing people and really committed to like being like, I'm going to find 15 soldering irons because I want to teach this soldering iron class,
Right.
And even if that means like having to buy one and then return it or whatever kind of rogue thing they had to do to make it happen. And that often like creative work is really work, sometimes interesting things come out of it and sometimes it doesn't. And so for me, like, I guess maybe the easiest way to say that is just being more experimental, or trying lots of things and seeing what sticks, which is a thing personally I'm not tuned to doing just because of my personality. I tend to be sort of very structured person. And so that's been probably the thing that's changed my life the most.
That's really interesting. So, unfortunately, our time for today is up. This has been really fascinating. Regarding these the Deadtech archives that you're digitizing, where should people go to take a peek at those?
Yeah, fortunately, somehow I've managed to keep renewing the domain name year after year. So deadtech.net, which is the old domain name, will take you right there. It will redirect you to like a Vimeo kind of gallery. But there's some new pages coming up for that site. One of the things I want to do is provide a little bit more context than just the video provides. We had a graphic designer that we worked with really closely by the name of John Resch for years, and his posters for every show were amazing. And so I really want to make sure that his work is seen as as kind of contextualizes those videos. So if they go to deadtech.net, they should be able to see the videos today and hopefully more interesting things soon.
That's great. How about the work with the Shimmering Trashpile?
Yeah. So,
did I get the name right?
No, that's great. Yeah, you totally got it right. I mean, the name is meant to be sort of the most immemorable thing you could come up with. So I'm looking forward to having it misidentified on flyers across the country next year.
Excellent.
Yeah. What's funny is I think in 2019, right, you can sort of do a lot and have a presence on places like Instagram or whatever before you even have a website. And so there is a shimmeringtrashpile.com website, but certainly on Instagram and stuff, you can find out more. And also on YouTube, I'm trying to do some sort of how-to making videos for the costumes and other instruments and stuff that I'm making. So hopefully you'll be able to get your dose of Trashpile in anywhere you go.
Right. Well, it seems like the kind of thing that is custom made for like Instagram and YouTube anyway. So I think that's a pretty smart play.
Yeah. I really like gross and neon things, and so but social media loves that stuff.
Yeah, indeed. So true. Well, Rob, I want to thank you for taking the time. This was really great. It was great to get to know you more, and great to hear these stories. It's fantastic.
Yeah, Darwin, it's totally my pleasure. I'm extremely flattered. I've been a fan of your podcast for a long time, so it's really great to be on.
I appreciate it. All right. Well, with that, we will say goodbye, and we'll talk again soon.
Yeah, great. Thanks so much.
All right, bye. Many thanks to Rob for the great chat. It was really cool to hear about the process of having this space. If you want to check more out, please jump over to the podcast website. That's artmusictech.libsyn.com and take a look at the show notes. There will be links to a couple of different places for you to go and check out Rob's work. I want to thank also the burst of Patreon people that came out in these first couple of weeks to help out. It's really amazing to get that kind of support, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. And for everybody, I want to thank you so much for continuing to listen, continuing to support the podcast, sharing it with your friends, and talking about it on social media. I really do appreciate it. If you get a chance, go over to some site, whether it's iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, or whatever. And if you have an opportunity to like it or share it or do something interesting with the podcast, I'd really appreciate that. But with that, I'm going to let you have the rest of your week. Thank you so much, and we'll catch you next time around. Bye.